Hello everyone, welcome to the 170th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video I'll be talking about psychic pollution and psychic limitations. So, I've been to many conferences and on climate change, and you always hear a big focus on the material side of things. So the pollution, the plastic and all of the other pollutants that are an issue, of course, like pesticides and all that. Don't get me wrong, of course they are an issue that need to be addressed. But as humanity, we are also responsible for a new type of pollution, which other creatures like animals cannot create, which is psychic pollution. And psychic pollution is simply like the negative thoughts that you are constantly brooding in your mind and sometimes even vocalizing and verbalizing that escape into another dimension, coalesce with other thoughts that resonate with yours and form what you call in the spiritual jargon, egregores or thought forms that then create this kind of feedback loop back to humanity. And so, in my previous videos, I compare the human mind to fertile soil in which you can grow ideas. Like you have a seed of an idea there, like a thought that comes into your mind, and then you can cultivate that thought, and then that thought has a kind of a life of its own in an ethereal or non-material dimension, which you may not be aware of, but which definitely exists. And the more you entertain these negative thoughts, the more they sort of then reverberate back to you and try to sort of stay alive. So also in my previous videos, I talk about thoughts that can sort of feed on themselves or tap into source, which do not require human thought to be sustained, and thoughts that basically are limited or restricted and need constant human sort of feeding. So you can compare it to a plant basically that can tap directly into the energy of the sun via its leaves. It's connected to the source via that way. So it's feeding off of the soil, which is kind of like feeding off of nothingness or zero or the material side, and this feeding off the ethereal energy, which is like distilled energy from infinity through the portal of the sun into this dimension. And so that's how a plant ideally should be sort of cultivated. And the same for certain thoughts like angels or positive spirits or things that basically have a role to play into infinity and can touch the creator, and thereby they don't necessarily need constantly to feed off of humanity to survive. But negative thoughts, because they're only limited in time, because they cannot reach into infinity because, well, they're limited, obviously. Like, imagine a thought that restricts your lifespan to 30 years rather than infinity. So that thought will die at some point. And so it needs to, but anything wants to stay alive. Like your thoughts want to stay alive as much as you want to stay alive. The thought cannot be dumber than the thinker, and they inherit all of the characteristics of humans. It's just they don't. Well, they're grounded in materiality through humans, but then they're, sort of above humans in some respects. But because they cannot feed off of this energy from infinity, they're doubly dependent on humans, because humans do feed on infinity. Like we receive the energy of the sun and we metabolize it and all that stuff. And then we create these thoughts with our minds, which is like a transformation of one energy into another energy. And they're totally dependent on this. And so when you have these kinds of negative thoughts, and that you see especially prevalent in the sort of climate change sort of crowd, very panicked about the future of humanity, and seeing the future as very dark and entertaining sometimes very dark ideas as well, then they can become sort of almost enslaved by these egregores that constantly spread little seeds for them to keep on growing and keep on feeding those egregores with those negative ideas. And so that creates what's commonly referred to as echo anxiety and many other things. It's just like constantly having to protest, constantly having to like scream and being in these very negative emotions sometimes. And that's definitely an issue. And that is also linked to psychic limitations, because when you are in a certain frame of mind, a certain state of mind, then there are certain solutions that you can never think of in that state of mind. So, kind of tired here. So if you believe, for instance, that humanity is not deserving in terms of energy, that we're going to mess things up if we have access to too much energy, that now your only view of the future is that we should all ride bicycles and live in tiny houses and leave the plants and the animals alone and just minimize our impact. And where you have this pyramid, of like the human on top and like the animal kingdom on the bottom, and that's considered as ego. And then you have this idea of like the ecosystem and the human that is just among all of the other creatures, and that's considered echo. But that's no, you don't pretend like humans are just another animal, because that is totally, and again, it's totally linked to what I was saying previously. It's totally in denial of the new element that we bring to this dimension, which is thoughts. And so it's as if, oh, we're just an animal, so we can think crap, and that doesn't have any effect on reality. I mean, it's just my thoughts. They're circumscribed in this brain. They don't affect reality. And in fact, I'll just shed my clothes and just live naked like Adam and Eve back into the Garden of Eden and pretend like we never took a bite of the fruit of knowledge and started having thoughts and serving as the bridge between an immaterial dimension and the material dimension, having the power of materializing ideas, but also issuing thoughts that then have a life of their own, evolve, and then reverberate and create this feedback loop with humanity, aiming towards forming a global collective organism. No, none of that. The ecosystem is already a global collective organism. It didn't wait for humans to be global. So let's just stay like this. And that's basically like a baby that would lobotomize his brain, basically, and just be in a coma, and be like an unconscious, like deciding that this planet should remain in an unconscious state rather than conscious state. And I'm not saying that it isn't smart. Like a human being in a coma, the body is still quote unquote smart. It still does things like the heart beats and the lungs function and whatever. But the possibilities of the body are it just doesn't do anything, right? So humans naked in the Garden of Eden, that is essentially like if this planet was in a coma. Sure, all kinds of mechanisms are still functioning, ecosystems will balance, like your body will balance or whatever, and you're being fed with a tube and whatever. But any kind of shock, any kind of problem or whatever, and it's the end. You die. So that translates into an asteroid hits the planet, or a natural climate change, which occurs like another ice age or some other kind of climate change that isn't related to human activity hits us, and this ecosystem just goes down the toilet. And so psychic limitations is also that. It's like this lack of imagination of what we could do in the future, and like thinking humans don't deserve to have unlimited access to unlimited energy because they do crap with it, or we should like be humble and go to what is strictly necessary for our survival, rather than pushing for discovering unlimited energy sources, like finalizing nuclear fusion, for instance, like really like pushing the research in that direction, making sure that we have nuclear fusion, which is unlimited clean energy for everyone. And that's kind of like the cells in a baby that see that it's going exponential in its growth in its mother's womb, and seeing that the womb has reached capacity and saying, whoa, if now the lungs start breathing and we're in this exponential curve, we're going to completely suffocate and kill ourselves. And they have a point, by the way, because if a baby tries to start breathing while still inside the womb, then he definitely suffocates. And by the way, if you're hearing some sounds, it's because I'm near the sea here, so, enjoying a tiny little holiday. Sometimes you need to relax a bit. And so they have a point. The baby should only start breathing once outside the womb, and that is like the moment where you start breathing, you start accessing or tapping into this infinite clean energy, is also the moment where you have to sort of, it's not that like humanity has to be born, it's born like in a new dimension, and it's more like this kind of awakening of consciously understanding who we are, what are we doing here, what the hell are we supposed to do, and transcending all of the different kind of limitations that we've placed upon us, like capitalism, which is just mindless exponential growth, or the debt-based monetary system, which is linked to capitalism, of course, and plenty of different things, like our political systems, which are centralized, and like the shift has to be almost like simultaneous, basically. And nuclear fusion, if you think about it, it's this mirror between the way the mother feeds the baby and humanity feeding itself. So the mother is breathing oxygen, right? She has access to unlimited energy, and then that energy has to be converted via her bodily mechanisms into energy that is directly assimilable by the baby through the placenta, through the bloodstream, right? So the baby cannot tap directly into this infinite energy so long as it's inside the womb. Now, if you look at humanity's situation, we are on this planet and we consume solar energy, the energy of the sun, but solar energy that has been processed by this planet first and transformed into vegetables, animals, oil, any kind of resource basically on this planet is sun energy. Oil is just very old sun energy. And even uranium, you could say, is sun energy, but just also very old. And so we're feeding off of this planet's kind of blood and the bloodstream via the placenta, because we cannot tap directly into solar energy yet. And solar panels is just like tiny, tiny little inkling of doing that. It's kind of like the baby has hiccups, inside the womb to sort of prepare its lungs to function, And that's like just a tiny little sign, because like solar accounts for what, like 2% or 3% of total energy input, so like production. So it's really minimal. But again, it's the logic that counts. Now, what does nuclear fusion represent? It's creating miniature suns, miniature stars. I don't know how to say it another way, but it's like creating these plasmas at hundreds of millions of degrees, emulating what the sun is producing, so that we can tap into sun energy that we produce from ourselves on this planet directly. I mean, the relationship cannot be more clear, right? It's the same, exactly the same as a baby that is now capable of breathing on the outside and tapping into this unlimited energy directly, not having to go through its mother's, placenta and bloodstream to tap into her infinite source of energy. And instead of like feeding off of the sun via, all of that transformation of plants and animals and all that stuff, or oil, we can now tap in directly into sun energy by creating these mini suns on planet Earth. But again, this has to be done with the right consciousness at the right time. However, and this is like, again, psychic limitations, really important. If you have scientists that believe, oh no, this is not possible, or humanity doesn't deserve it, or we shouldn't be doing this, or whatever, then you're blocking your mind to receiving intuitions or information that can, push you to create these revolutionary technologies. because you feel like you don't deserve, because you feel that if humanity has access to this energy, will just spread like a cancer across the entire universe. And again, that might be the case, but in my view, we will never be allowed to do that. We'll be wiped off of this planet before we even, manage to get that far, which is what happened to, well, I wouldn't say that that's what happened to the Atlanteans and all the other civilizations. I think that sometimes we're a bit too judgmental on what actually happened to these civilizations. Like maybe the great floods and all of those things is just their three-dimensional experience of transitioning to a higher plane of existence, because they've reached the necessary conditions to form a global collective organism that can reside in a higher dimension as a functioning global collective organism. And so they're kind of lifted off of the 3D and into the 4D or 5D, whatever you want to call it. But it's the same as a baby. I mean, it doesn't stay in its mother's womb and it awakens in its mother's womb and starts breathing in its mother's womb. It's in another dimension. It's outside of the mother's womb. And then the whole process of birth, I mean, from cells that are still in the third dimension, they see the vestige of like a few cells that were a few traces that were left behind by another civilization, and saying, oh, they were killed because they were responsible. I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. I just think that this planet gave birth to several civilizations before us, and we're kind of like the final one, I think. At least that's what they say in many esoteric teachings, because, well, we are a very heavy baby, 8 billion people, 8 billion cells. I mean, that's like a baby elephant. Whereas the Atlanteans and others were like a handful of millions. So they're tiny, quote unquote, organisms compared to us. So, and Earth has like had a hard time with us, just like it had a hard time with Atlanteans. We've basically nearly self-destructed and blew up the entire ecosystem several times over with, coming so close with nuclear war and all that stuff. So yeah, very important that we overcome these psychic blockages or psychic limitations, because this idea that it cannot happen or that it's not possible or whatever. It's like if ideas are falling from the sky and your mind is like a little bucket or something, a receptacle, a receiver that can capture these ideas depending on how your mind is configured. And if you're like, nope, it's not possible, it's like you're in the 15th, 16th century and you're like, nope, there's nothing outside the Bible. That's the absolute and ultimate truth. And you're never going to come up with gravity. You're never going to come up with electromagnetism and all these kind of theories of science and empiricism. You need to first open up your mind to like, oh, but maybe, the empirical method actually can access, certain truths and whatever. And I just find that in the circles that are discussing climate change, people are very much like this, very much shielding themselves from many ideas because of fears, because of, lack of positive thinking. And that in essence is quite detrimental. So it's really important. So to recap this video, one, really important, stop creating psychic pollution, please, because it's as difficult for this planet to digest as actual physical pollution, especially because ultimately humans are still terrible at managing their psychic pollution, even though they're becoming more and more efficient at managing their material pollution. Even though like there's just so many people that are doing psychology studies, and so many therapists, and so many energy healers that are everywhere, and shamans and all that stuff, and people doing ayahuasca. And I think it's no coincidence, because we just can't keep this psychic pollution going on, because otherwise we're screwed basically. It's like this baby that sort of has this bad idea about itself and starting to self-destruct via its own thoughts, sort of self-destructing itself. Nocebo effect. It has a name. But this is a nocebo effect at the collective level, at the level of humanity, and it's pretty darn strong, I would say, in these days. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, stop being like this, with your mind. Be like this, open to receiving new ideas, because obviously the originality and novelty of the ideas that you're going to tap into are dependent on your open-mindedness to receive those ideas, and that might be possible. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and talk to you in the next one. Bye guys.